record now. So for participation and engagement, there will be time during the presentation for comments and questions, as well as afterwards. During the presentations, as you have your questions, you can share them with us in the chat, and I'll do my best to keep track of those. During the Q&A, please raise your hand or use the chat function, and just state your name when you start to speak. Turn off your mic if you are not speaking, and always take care of yourself. So I'm going to hand it over to Luke, Maps, and Sonia.
Okay, so I'm briefly going to get us started before passing it over to Maps to talk a bit about some background necessary for this work. But basically, we're going to talk first off about the requirements that were just established yesterday in regulations. So the regulations were published yesterday that named municipalities and villages as the first prescribed public sector bodies under our legislation, the Dismantling Racism and Hate Act. And that requires the development of a plan to address systemic hate, inequity, and racism by April 1st, 2025. So we know the government policies and programs can appear neutral, but have the effect of disadvantaging underrepresented and underserved groups, which is why this work is so important. I mean, government's plan has taken the form of the strategy, which is about a year old. And when we think about the 49 municipalities and 11 villages in Nova Scotia, we recognize there's unique circumstances and needs that need to be taken into account to promote equity and anti-racism. This is why we think this exercise is going to be so impactful in general for progress towards equity and inclusion in the province. And I think we would also point to the fact that the future of our province is dependent on us as a province through and with municipalities and villages making the commitment. How can we expect our communities to thrive, for reconciliation to continue, for our recruited healthcare professionals to stay in the province, to maintain our healthcare services, and just generally for basic recognition of human rights without some of this work? So the plan requirements, really briefly, your plan should be informed by engagement with underrepresented and underserved communities within the jurisdiction, your jurisdiction. So we're going to talk a bit about this in the second section in terms of generating some ideas and responding to some of the feedback we've heard about this requirement. The plans also need to be in place, like I said, by April 1st, 2025, made available in a publicly accessible format. And following the format of the Accessibility Act requirements, we're also requiring that they be updated every 3 years. So there's some nice overlap here in terms of the planning exercise that we'll talk about as an opportunity to combine efforts.
So part of our work involves making sure that our municipalities and villages have foundational understandings of key concepts and terms involved in the work of developing equity and anti-racism action plans. So the definition for equity here is the recognition that everyone doesn't begin in the same place in society. It's important that we acknowledge that people face adverse conditions, circumstances that make it challenging for them to achieve the same goals as everyone. So equity really is about advocating for those who've been historically disadvantaged, and it is about fairness, essentially. So it's not a question about what is the same, but rather the point is from where one begins, and then we think about the history and other factors that determine what is fair. Inequity, by contrast, is about unfairness or lack of justice, in which biases are perpetuated, individuals and groups are treated differently and unequally, and this can often be resulting in systematic and pattern disparities in opportunities, resources, rights, etc. So some of the ones we can think of here is systems of power and privilege, policies and implementation of those policies that have big social, economic, racial, or gender-based impacts and distinctions. And so these policies can show up in various areas of life, or these impacts rather can show up in areas of education, healthcare, employment, and access to basic services. So when we think about equity, think of it as being intentional about creating opportunities for those historically underserved and underrepresented communities so that they can have equal access to resources. So equity is about the measures and the reasonable accommodations that are necessary to identify the structural injustice and cultural barriers, discrimination and unfairness, and make sure that there are pathways and opportunities for example, women, Indigenous people, visible racialized minority groups, persons and disabilities, as well as the 2S LGBTQIA+ community to succeed in all aspects of life. Next slide, please. Importantly, we need to understand what the definition of racism is. So racism is the unfair treatment, prejudice, or hatred by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people based on their perceived or actual membership to a racial or ethnic group. So this is about having the power to carry out the discrimination or the unfair treatment, the hatred or the prejudice through policies, through practices that shape the cultural beliefs and values within society. So to understand racism, it's important that we understand that race itself is a social construct that artificially divides people into distinct groups based on characteristics such as physical appearance, particularly color, ancestral heritage, cultural affiliation, and racial classification. And the purpose of this really is to suit the social and economic interests of a dominant group at the time. So as I said before, race is a false construct, and that importance that it gives to skin color and ancestry is often associated with behavior and intelligence and culture. And so in as much as it's a false construct, it has very real consequences for a lot of people. By contrast, anti-racism is the work of actively opposing racism. So we're talking about advocating for changes in political, economic, and social life. And to do this, we need to identify and eliminate racism, change oppressive systems and structures, policies, practices, and attitudes so that historic, current, and future harm can be eliminated and that power is distributed and shared more equitably. So why equity and anti-racism matter? If those definitions weren't enough, I think it's important that we drive the point home. As government entities, municipalities, and villages have the unique position of authority and responsibility within their communities. So to understand how to promote equity and anti-racism initiatives, think of it as a moral imperative. So by that, I mean, it's the right thing to do. There's a moral obligation to uphold principles of fairness, justice, and equality, where equity and anti-racism initiatives align with these principles. We need to be striving to eliminate discrimination, prejudice, and barriers to access to make sure that everyone has equal access and is treated fairly with dignity and with respect. In terms of the legal obligation, this might be something that folks are more familiar with. There are legal requirements and standards in place that mandate government entities to address issues of equity and anti-racism. These may include human rights legislation, disability rights laws, and regulations pertaining to discrimination and equality. So when we proactively promote these initiatives, we can demonstrate that compliance with legal mandates and protect yourselves from potential litigation. Lastly, it's a strategic initiative. So by this, I mean understanding and promoting equity and anti-racism initiatives can help to promote social cohesion. So social cohesion within your communities. When individuals feel that they're valued and included, regardless of their background or circumstances, it contributes to a sense of belonging and solidarity, which in turn strengthens community bonds and mitigates those social tensions that I mentioned before. For added context, if we think about our evolving population in Nova Scotia, in 2021, there were about 52,425 Indigenous people in Nova Scotia, making up 5.5% of the population. Respondents to a 2021 census were asked if they identified with specific categories of visible minority. These racialized groups accounted for 9.8% of the population. So Nova Scotians that identified as Black made up the largest population in a racialized group in Nova Scotia, so about 28,000. And this is followed by those who identified as South Asian, about 21,000, and those who identified as Chinese, 11,600, and those who identified as Arab, 10,600, and those who identified as Filipino, 6,000. So Nova Scotia has the highest proportion of transgender and non-binary people aged 15 and older in Canada, 0.48%, or almost 1 in every 200 people living in Nova Scotia. And amongst 15 to 35 among the provinces, the statistic increases to 1.17, or 1 in every 100 people in Nova Scotia. In 2020, the number of police reported hate crimes increased by 70%, 7-0 in Nova Scotia, roughly 6 incidents per 100,000 of the population. So police reported hate crime is defined as a criminal violation against a person or property motivated by hate based on race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or any other similar factor. Lastly, the strategic imperative is important for building trust. So your effective governance requires that the public trust and have confidence in the institutions. And to demonstrate that commitment to serving all members of the community equitably and fairly, it's important that we build this trust with residents. Economic prosperity is another big one. Inclusive communities are more economically prosperous. Municipalities and villages can unlock this potential when they are intentional about equity and anti-racism, which leads to greater motivation, innovation, productivity, and economic growth as a whole. So the important thing to understand about your equity and anti-racism plan is that we're really moving beyond your traditional equity, diversity, and inclusion initiative. The plan is not the same. It is, whereas traditional EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, focuses internally on an organization and mainly on employees of an organization, this work is much broader than that. You're expected to look at the way the policies and programs are developed, how services are delivered, how budgetary decisions are made. So it's not enough to just focus on the diversity at all levels within your organization. You need to also be considering your policy-making process, who you engage with to determine priorities for a given year, who you engage with to determine the options that are available for a particular policy, program, or service, and how you determine the impacts of those policies or decisions. So the emphasis here really is about keeping a policy and engagement focus while you're considering what to include in your plan. And of course, OEA, our office, and AMAN's, Association of Municipal Administrators of Nova Scotia, will be here to help you along the way. Just it's important that we acknowledge the profound impact that your decision-making has on the daily lives of Nova Scotians.
Okay, now speaking to some types of municipal actions to review, in light of some of the things that have already been discussed and some points that have been shared, I would just talk about the different actions that we feel are relevant to look at. Take, for example, laws and policies, right? What laws are we responsible for? What laws are you responsible for as a municipality? Or, what policies are we responsible for? Who is meaningfully involved in creating these laws and policies? And when we think about that, and we say, let's take an example concerning the example of law and policies, let's talk about land use bylaws, right? These can determine where communities settle, what's near them, and really the decisions around this have led to some races being separated, right? We've seen gentrification, we've seen where, and by that I mean like where an influx of a certain race or wealthier people happens to a particular area, displacing poorer residents and all that. And we've also seen environmental racism. So when laws are being made, it's important to think about, how these laws are being made and how these policies are being made, like Marv said, and who really are we talking to when we're making these laws. It's also important to think about resource allocation, for example, considering what determines really what is prioritized or what gets funding, and what gets funded and which do not know. How do you not know the decision? How are you able to tell how the decisions are made that funding goes to a particular group or goes to a particular area? And so considering these things really can have significant impact on underrepresented and underserved communities. And by underrepresented and underserved, we keep referring to persons with a disability, Indigenous persons, persons of African descent, right? And so we're also inviting you to think about programs and services in your actions to review. We're thinking about where to place services, and really where further advantage and disadvantage could happen to communities, right? Thinking about municipal water and sewer, thinking about recreation, thinking about community transportation, like how are these services provided and who determines, what to provide and where to provide, and how do we really evaluate the impact? So in light of that, we'll be just sharing a few examples as already exist within our province Take, for example, I see we have Kathy MacArthur here. She said they say they're from Kings County, for example. So we do have the municipality of County of Kings. They issued a strategy for belonging in 2021. And if you take a good read to that document, you would see that there was an emphasis on economic empowerment, right? And so such an example, that document is really an example of what an action could look like. And within that document, you'll see it talks about the development of a social entrepreneurship hub. It talks about developing a directory of diverse business owners. You know, it talks about promoting Indigenous and African Nova Scotian businesses, things like that. Another example would be Recreation Nova Scotia's anti-racism charter. Well, this is something that, I mean, for those of you who are already familiar, or those who might be able to use the link, the slides will be shared after the session. You could just click in to see what this is about. It really provides unifying guidelines for the recreation sector. So this is like a low-hanging fruit, as some would refer to it, right? So it's great potential for, it's a great potential action for your plan. It's something you can definitely keep in mind as you think about what recreation could look like. But this pretty much ensures that actions where appropriate is considering all underrepresented and underserved communities. For example, when working with, when working on the anti-racism plan, you may want to add additional steps, right, to ensure you're considering access to recreational services. Okay, I'll go on to the next slide. Thank you. So another example, an idea would be the municipality of Chester. They have an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee, which issued an action plan. And that action plan identifies a number of objectives and supporting actions, really including say the following example, which is an objective saying that they would provide advice and recommendations to council concerning opportunities to create welcoming and inclusive cultural and social spaces, right? Ensuring a respectful and equitable community for all to live and work. Now, that's a great example. These examples really are just to give you like a head start, just to start seeing what's already out there and to keep you thinking about what other options or what other things you could think about and what strategies you could use in creating your equity and anti-racism plans. Now, I'm just going to quickly touch on some supports and tools that we... One sec. Okay. I'm just going to quickly touch on some supports and tools here. So OEA has developed, when I say OEA, I mean the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism. We have developed some resources that will guide the development of equity and anti-racism plans. So we're not leaving you alone and just telling you, go create these plans and leaving you by yourself. We've included the templates, and we will be including some educational materials as well. The Equity and Anti-Racism Plan, Guidance for Municipality and Villages, is a resource really that's designed specifically to help you develop your equity and anti-racism plan in time, as has been required by the Dismantling Racism and Hate Act and the associated regulations. So the Equity and Anti-Racism Self-Assessment Tool, for example, it will help you pretty much evaluate what your current practices are, your policies, the culture that already exists that relates to equity and anti-racism. It helps you identify what areas for improvement there might be, and it should be able to help you develop targeted strategies to foster a more inclusive and equitable workplaces and communities, I mean. And then we also have what we call the Equity and Anti-Racism Primer for municipalities and villages. So this resource is intended to provide prescribed public sector bodies with foundational knowledge. It gives definitions and concepts that are essential to meaningfully engage, and we keep emphasizing meaningful engagement, right, in the development of your equity and anti-racism plans. And so now these supports, tools and resources, and whatever supports and resources we would continue to build will be available on this link. Again, you get the slide at the end. But I mean, if you want to scan the code, the QR code, this is also a way to access it. But if you want us to email you the links directly, or you have questions at all that has to do with this, feel free to reach out to us through this email provided. Yes, that's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. Hi, everybody. Laura Beth McPherson here with the Accessibility Directorate. I'm going to take the baton from my colleagues at the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism and spend a little bit of time reviewing the legal requirements through the Accessibility Act. Just going to spend a short amount of time on this section because we really want to get to our discussion later. You're going to see some commonalities between our act and the Dismantling Hate and Racism Act in terms of timing and maybe even requirements. So really the main reason we wanted to come here together today, both the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism and the Directorate and AMANS, is to provide a space for everybody to ask questions about the planning process to meet requirements under both acts. I'm going to go through the Accessibility Act requirements here, and then we'll pause for a bit of a discussion. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, to use the chat, and Julie is monitoring that chat. So Julie, feel free to interrupt me as we go along if you see anything coming through. Next slide, please, Luke. Are you, thank you so much. I just want to start here. I'm not sure if folks in the room would have seen this slide before, just to frame our accessibility work. You know, it kind of came out of the gate a little sooner than the Dismantling Hate and Racism Act. As OEA mentioned, their act was enacted very recently in April 2022, where Nova Scotia's Accessibility Act was enacted in 2017, so 5 years prior. So I think it's just important to acknowledge that the work is coming through the province in a sequential format. So there's a little bit more work that's already happened around accessibility because of that. So just wanting to also share the national context here, and that accessibility work is happening all across the country. There's 6 provinces that have accessibility legislation enacted. We were the 3rd out of the gate. I think we should be really proud of that. And New Brunswick doesn't quite have legislation yet, but they have put forward a legislative framework. So just wanting to let everybody know where Nova Scotia fits in and where all of you fit in to the bigger picture of the Canadian landscape. Next slide, please. And just a reminder, I know a lot of folks have probably seen this recently, but for those who haven't, we do have new disability statistics through Stats Canada, with a new Nova Scotia disability rate at almost 38%. So when we talk about the need for an Accessibility Act and our work to make sure that all Nova Scotians can fully and meaningfully take part in everyday life, we're talking about a fairly large proportion of our population. And just want to recognize that, as MAPS mentioned earlier, under the equity side of equity and anti-racism, persons with disabilities are included. So just wanting to make that distinction and alignment piece between the two acts, that there is alignment in terms of the scope of both acts. So that is where one opportunity for alignment is really targeting persons with disabilities from an equity perspective. And we are still the province with the largest percentage of persons with disabilities in the country. Next slide, please, Luke. Thanks so much. So I'm just going to go through these requirements. A lot of you have heard these before. We have lots of resources to share with you on this as well. So if you don't catch it all in this short overview, there's lots of opportunity to learn more. But prescribed bodies through the Accessibility Act obviously include municipalities and villages. They must establish or continue an accessibility advisory committee, of which half of the members must be persons with disabilities or organizations that represent persons with disabilities. This really gets at our principle of nothing about us without us, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Next slide. There's no description in the act around the role of the committee, though, so I just want to make a point that it's up to each organization to decide what role the AAC will play in their accessibility work, but it is very common that the AAC supports the planning process of our prescribed bodies. Also related to requirements, PPSBs must create an accessibility plan within 1 year of being prescribed, and the plan must have input from persons with disabilities. So the language in the Act is you must seek input from persons with disabilities. So there's no requirement around how you engage, how comprehensive the engagement is, but that you must seek input. There's also requirements around the content of your accessibility plan. So as we think about updating our plans across Nova Scotia, this is an important consideration just to make sure that you're including content around the progress you made to prevent and remove barriers to accessibility, how your organization will continue to prevent and remove barriers, and your monitoring process and evaluation process to assess the impact of your actions. Next slide, please. And your plan must be made publicly available. And so typically this means posting it on your organization's website, but this also really is up to each organization on how you go about making it public. And related to our session today, there is a legal requirement that accessibility plans must be updated every 3 years. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But also, I just want to add, through Access by Design, PPSBs will also need to comply with our accessibility regulations as they are developed. And as most of you know, this is happening in a sequence, so they're not all being created and enacted at the same time. The first standard to be approved will be the Built Environment Standard, and it will be approved later this year, 2024. So when does your plan need to be ready? It depends on what cohort you're in. So municipalities and villages, you're cohort 1, which means you are meant to have your plan updated by April 1st of 2025, which is the exact same date as your deadline for having your equity and anti-racism plan finished. And that was very intentional, and our team will talk about that a little bit later, but just quickly here, we wanted as the provincial government to give an opportunity, an option for municipalities and villages to coordinate your planning process to meet requirements under both acts. And one of the actions and decisions we made was to align those prescription dates to allow you to do that. So when we say completed by April 1st, that means approved and publicly available. So keep that in mind with your timelines. Thanks, Luke. And so just in a nutshell, your requirements for updating your plan are the exact same requirements as when you created your first plan. So there's no new legal requirements, but they're all the same. So the engagement of persons with disabilities, the content of the plan, all of those pieces I just went through, making it publicly available, all of those were requirements through your first plan, and they will apply to your updated plan. Yeah, and I think I would like to say, you know, your first accessibility plan is a strong foundation for revising your plan, right? You're not starting from scratch. Each organization decides the extent of your revision process. You're not required to develop brand new commitments if that's not realistic for you. And as you continue to build momentum toward improving accessibility and moving forward on the goals that you've already set, the updating process is really an opportunity to review and revise your commitments to make sure that they're relevant, realistic, and achievable for the next 3 years. And so just wanting to make it very clear that updating your plan does not need to be a process as comprehensive as when you created your first plan. It's essentially a check-in on how you're doing, where you're at, and what's needed for the next 3 years. So I just want that to be really clear for folks, that the scope of the process is up to you, that the requirement legally is to update your plan, but there's no specifics around how in the Accessibility Act. And the last thing I want to say on this point is sometimes it's easy to focus in on the legal requirements and that checklist that you need to accomplish. I just want to remind folks that this work is really about creating an impactful plan that can help prevent and remove barriers for persons with disabilities. This is about change and helping us as a province become accessible. So it's important to know your legal requirements for sure and to meet them. But also let's just keep it front of mind the whole reason that we have plans and what we're doing, and to really hone in on what's realistic for you and your organization. Next slide. So also our team, so the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism have a whole website of resources, as Sonia mentioned. Highly recommend you check that out. It really speaks to their work. At the Directorate, we also have several resources available through our website. We are launching a new toolkit around its guidance around updating your accessibility plan. We're almost finished the toolkit. We just want to make sure you know it's meant to be inspiration and a guide. It's not a recommended approach. So we have like a 10-step process, but that's really just to give you an option for different components of the process that you really want advice on. So, you know, your organization can follow one or all of the steps depending on what you need, but it really is just a guide for you. And we also have some additional resources to support your planning process, some different fact sheets on the role of your AAC, community engagement. We have some new planning templates coming out, and we have our plain language resources coming out this summer too, to help you with making sure your plan is accessible when you launch it. Next slide, Luke. Reading my mind. And I also just want to remind folks, I know you're probably familiar with our accessibility, our Access Includes Everyone website. If not, this is where we're putting, this is where we house all the existing accessibility plans in Nova Scotia, our disability statistics, accessibility stories, our resources. We have a resource hub on this website. So just wanting to refer people there. There's lots of awesome information that can help you as you move forward with this work. And yeah, so just, I think I can say on behalf of both teams, you know, you are all super important partners in this work to create a more equitable and accessible province. And municipalities and villages, you're the first groups prescribed through the OEA's Act. And you were in cohort 1 of our prescription dates in our Act. And so you are required to develop plans to address systemic hate, inequity, and racism, and update your accessibility plans both by April 1st, 2025. So our teams wanted you to know that there is an option to meet requirements under both acts through a combined equity, anti-racism, and accessibility plan. This could be a joint plan as well with multiple municipalities or other organizations that are prescribed. So just wanting to part with these messages that is an option, and that our team at the Directorate, the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism, and AMANS are working collaboratively to help you, to provide resources and support to help you meet those requirements. And Julie is going to speak more to that in a moment, AMANS' role, but just wanting to check in with folks, just recognizing we've been talking quite a bit so far. Do you have any questions on the planning requirements between both acts at this point before we move on? And Julie, was there anything in the chat?
No questions yet, just asking if the slide deck will be available for everyone, and I will share that back through our group contact email, and when the recording's ready as well, we'll share that.
Great.
So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or pop them in the chat right now, or comments.
Yeah. Let's just pause for a minute, see. Yeah. I also just wanted to, while you're thinking about a question, introduce my colleague, Andrew Jansen, who's on here. I think Julie mentioned Andrew earlier, but just wanting Andrew to give a wave, if that's okay, and just acknowledge that it's Andrew's great work that went into the toolkit that we'll be launching really soon in July. And just happy to have Andrew here today, and thank you for your awesome work on that.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions, folks? I mean, I know there's questions because We get them all the time when we're out in community. So I'm going to probe a little bit. I know that there's questions.
Okay, so we have Sarah Taylor asking, as part of the resources available, are there recommended survey questions available to support the community engagement piece?
I think this will be a great time for us to jump into the engagement bit, if that's okay. Just so, since that's the only question that's come up, right? Yeah.
To jump into what? Sorry, Sonia?
The engagement conversation.
Oh,
Yeah, so at this point, there's nothing specific around survey questions. We're going to talk about possible ways that you can do your engagement activities to inform your plans. Definitely something we can take away and consider. A survey probably is, to be quite frank, not sufficient in meaningfully engaging, but it could be part of an engagement approach, I think, as well.
yeah.
on our team, we have sent out a new tool called the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Guide. And it's meant to be a guide to support monitoring and evaluation of your plans. And it's specifically for municipalities, villages. And I believe there are some sample survey questions in an appendix of that guide. And so if you haven't received it yet, it's coming out soon. And so I believe from our team's perspective, we have some resources around surveys. But I would agree with Luke, it's one method of engagement and collecting information. But the context of these tools is around monitoring and evaluation, not community engagement. So just wanting to be very clear there that this is about kind of measuring your progress. So, but there are some sample surveys in that.
And Elise echoed what you just said as well in the chat about the templates for engagement in the accessibility monitoring tool. Natalie?
Hi, I'm just wondering, am I correct in assuming that in the Anti-Racism Act or plan that we do not need a committee? We can just go out and community engagement or use the accessibility committee as well?
So I'll start us off, and Maps and Roxanne, feel free to jump in. No requirement for a committee, but if you would like to use your existing or build on to your existing accessibility committee to serve the purpose of informing a unified plan or a combined plan, that would certainly be a good approach to take. At minimum, there would need to be some level of responsibility in terms of the plan's development, obviously within a municipality or village, and hopefully include some first voice in through that process.
Thank you.
I will just add, though, if you did expand on your existing accessibility advisory committee, Natalie, to serve, let's say, both pieces of work, is that what I'm hearing you say? Like potentially expanding the membership?
Yes.
That the requirement still remains through our act that 50% must be persons with disabilities or organizations that represent persons with disabilities. So let's say you expanded the tent from 15 to 20 people, and you had 8 persons with disabilities, then you'd have to expand the first voice membership to 10 out of 20 on the persons with disabilities or organizations that represent side. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Barb, Shaw?
Thanks, Julie. It's Barb from Wolfville. Thank you for a really great, informative overview. And thank you for clarifying. I think I've asked 5 million times, when are we being prescribed? Now I know it's happened. Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question around in preparation, because we were aware that very soon we were going to be prescribed. So a number of years ago within the town of Wolfville, we started doing some, I feel, some good, meaningful engagement with our community and our community members. That led to great feedback that turned into program development. We went through a budget cycle, and we're now, honestly, 2.5 years later, ready to launch some programming, which will happen in August and September for us. So we have that initial engagement to build on. We're already framing out kind of next steps, and we are going to pull together an advisory group, because I feel that's the most, I think that's the most accessible way to get good information from the community, to flow it up to council in a brief period of time, because having a plan published by April 1 is a very brief period of time. So I want to ensure that the historic engagement pieces are still going to be relevant to this process, with the understanding that we are going to top that up. And again, going, using the self-assessment tool that's been provided, and all of the other pieces. So can I merge that engagement to have that more fulsome overall engagement perspective?
Yes, I can speak to that. I'm usually an advocate for folks demonstrating what work has been done to the past. So when you do go out to community again, you can say, this is what we've heard or have been hearing. What's missing? What would you like to add or expand upon, that kind of thing? It's a good demonstration to community that you've been listening, and it shows that we've done our homework, so to speak. So I think it's definitely worth incorporating and building upon as engagement, but also recognizing that it's just the starting point. It's a foundational piece to which people can speak to or reference, but there's more kind of input that you should be seeking out.
I'd love to add, I agree with Maps totally. So Barb, was your first engagement quite formal and comprehensive?
I would say it was multifaceted. So we did do some surveying, because we do that very broadly. We did very specific listening sessions. We did community pop-ups. So we really kind of encompassed stuff. And the questions that we were asking were, we're similar to what we do around our accessibility work. So where are the barriers in our community? What would make people feel more included? Because we were really framing this around inclusion.
Yeah.
And the feedback we got was very specific about, access to food. And we also, Wolfville is a town and gown community, so we have Acadia University here. And a lot of our feedback was specifically around, if we can start working in one area, we need to provide additional supports to our international student community. And so one of the programs that we've developed that we'll be launching in September is specifically around that. So we went out to lots of different community representatives. We did those broad-based conversations. We did pull what we heard reports. It went before council multiple times. Then we went into a program development cycle, again, with folks with lived experience. So it's been pretty comprehensive. Now I think we're getting into some of the questions are going to be around, internally we'll be looking at policies. And again, that framework of who's making decisions around spending and all of that. But this is a lot of rambling to say. It's been a long process, I think, but I think it gave, again, our council specifically a clear understanding that, we don't have all the resources that we would want to do this work, because that we don't have that. But if we did, we'd be having a different conversation. But the conversation we had was, where do we start? And where are the folks in our community who require additional supports to enhance their experience, unique to what's happening in Wolfville, which is, I think, the initial approach we've taken, and the approach that we've had good community response on so far.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful, because from the sounds of it, and Luke would have to speak to this more than me, but that sounds like fairly meaningful engagement. I think that from our ACT's perspective, like we have examples of, for example, when we developed Access by Design 2030 in 2017 and 2018, we did a full provincial major consultation that reached like over 1,000 Nova Scotians. And we used that data for several years after that. to help inform, new policies, and didn't necessarily have to go that in depth again for a little while. So I just wanted to make the point that there's others in the room that might have done a really comprehensive or meaningful engagement effort for their first plan or for other work, and that maybe the engagement this time is about kind of identifying what's relevant now, and just getting into collecting information to help really shape things, and maybe the engagement's not as in depth. And so from our perspective, that is totally okay to meet requirements as long as persons with disabilities are engaged. But from Luke's team's perspective, I think that's a good question to clarify. If a group did meaningful engagement like that fairly recently and then went out and did more engagement, but maybe it's not as in depth, would that meet the requirements through your act? Is that okay that I reframe that, Barb? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yes. So, Sonia, Maps, please chime in. But one thing that came to my mind is engagement fatigue. So, if you've just done engagement in recent year plus, it might not be appreciated by community to be going out and doing the same engagement activity again. What Maps said makes sense to me now, though, when I reflect on it. Like if it's more of a partially about validating what was previously heard and what progress has been made, that makes sense. But it sounds like you've done meaningful engagement to date, for sure.
Yeah, and again, I really appreciate kind of breaking it down even through this session, and again what was happening at the conference around, I think the big conversation that we need to start having is, where are we making our investments? And this is the same conversation that we need to have more of in relation to accessibility. And so again, I think obviously there's a need to continuously go back to the community. We may have engagement fatigue and Wolfville because we do a lot of it, but we're proud of the fact that we go back to the community and say, this is what we heard, this is what we're doing with it, and really kind of keeping that front and center. So even though we take a long time to do anything, we're doing it based on what the community has provided input around.
Great, thank you. There's two comments in the chat that I'm going to read in relation to this, and then I will go to Natalie and to Danielle. So Roxy Peterson from Town of Kentville says that they have put together a diversity and belonging task team that is an ad hoc committee of their inclusion and accessibility committee, and are directly engaging with community on both inclusion and anti-racism work. We hope this is a step in the right direction and will support this work. I don't know if our panel has any comments on that, or Roxy, if you'd like to add a little bit more information, now's your time.
Yes, it's since being in the role, I'm looking around the town and not seeing much diversity here. I come from an African-American background, so kind of wanted to launch right into that. I knew that there was a prescription coming down from the provincial government as far back as November. It was on its way, so it's great that it's finally landed today with the act, the Anti-Racism Hate Act. And we're the Inclusion and Accessibility Committee, KAYAC, are already working on our updating our inclusion and accessibility plan. So we're quite proud of that and the work we're doing. But it's great that we have our diversity and belonging task team. That the idea is they've got a 1-year mission to look at whether people within the town from African, Nova Scotia, Indigenous and racialised communities feel that they are adequately represented in the town through policies, bylaws, events, programming, the whole shebang. So they're going to spend a year looking at that, and they're also going to spend a year looking and reviewing the anti-racism policy that I wrote before it goes up to the CAO and others for approval. And so I'm hoping with that we're gonna dive into the act, the Anti-Racism and Hate Act, and use that team and enable that team to kind of look at solutions and work closely with town staff and our elected officials. So I'm quite excited. It's quite the task team is there's a lot of intersectionality to our 2S LGBTIA, our Pride community, and our African Nova Scotian community, our Indigenous community, as well as our racialized community of newcomers. So it's quite an exciting time, and I'm really excited to be supporting this. So yeah, if there's any questions, if anyone wants to collaborate, Roxanne, we're really excited to meet with you. So expect an invite soon to come out to one of our meetings. And so yes, and welcome. So that's what I've got.
Great, thanks, Roxy. So Laura just said, before I go back to Muriel, Roxy, it would be interesting to know what the terms of reference is for your diversity and belonging committee related to membership. Do you have any requirements around membership regarding first voice participation?
We do. I mean, we're trying to make sure that at least 60 to 70% of our membership are from equity-owned communities, so the voice doesn't get overshadowed. But it's important to make sure that there are allies that are involved, or I'm moving away from the word allies, but accomplices. There you go. And and partners too. We do have accomplices, and we do have equity-owned community that do come from outside of town, that live close to town. We have two of Nova Scotia's historic Black communities here, Pine Woods and Gibson Woods. So we have folks coming in from Gibson Woods. We're quite close to Annapolis Valley First Nations, so we have members from there as well. So it's not just about folks that live in the town, but it's about the partnerships in and around the town. And we've got a nice group of about 11 people. I guess we could go up to 20, but right now 11 is good. There's a lot of voice in the room, and we're really kind of we're forming now. We're storming, and we're going to get to norming, and we're really getting into the crux of things, right?
Great. Thank you, Roxy. Muriel says, here in Yarmouth, they have just formed an EDI committee to help directly with the anti-racism work, which they also hope is a move in the right direction to help advise the plan.
Absolutely.
Okay. Natalie, you had your hand up next. Question or comment?
Yeah, I just have a question around funding. Is there any funding available to hire someone to help support us in these plans?
So at this point, the resources that we're providing are not just being offered in isolation. So we're available to assist both offices, I think is fair to say, Laura Beth, right? And through our partnership with AMANS, which we're going to talk about a bit later in the slides when we get back to things. But there may be some additional access to funding for engagement activities, but at this juncture, nothing like funding for a dedicated position for municipality or group of municipalities to assist with this work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Danielle?
Hi, folks. So similar to others on the call today, like Barb, we have had really great, meaningful conversations and engagement regarding our accessibility plan. However, we are now transitioning our accessibility committee into a diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as accessibility committee, and creating one joint plan. Because we felt like our accessibility plan had a lot of intersectional pieces to it anyway. I guess my quandary and question to you all is, for engagement, is there kind of some, like a roadmap of, we don't want to over survey individuals. So when it comes to the DEI elements, is there a particular roadmap in which we should be looking at of, what engagement pieces do we want to know from a community beyond, the barriers, or do they feel like they have connection to community? Because again, we don't want that fatigue, but we want meaningful conversation. So I guess my question is really, what elements do we really need to provide in our plan, as well as, what input should we be looking for? Thanks.
So we're not going to be overly prescriptive about what level and means and ways you deploy in terms of engagement. We're going to talk about MAPS is going to talk about some ideas and ways to overcome challenges that we've heard about from initial conversations with some municipalities and villages in the next section. I made a note about the survey questions, so we're going to take that away and we'll develop something that we can add to the resources for surveying purposes or for engagement session purposes, like types of questions that you might be able to use in those scenarios. And I think broadly speaking, we can be generally available to sort of, does this look like an okay approach? That sort of thing. AMANs can help with that as well, but we can also be sort of a sounding board for your engagement design and try to help as best we can. It's probably a good segue into the next section of the presentation as well.
So I think MAPS, you're up, is that correct?
That's correct. If I could have the next slide, please. Oh, this is Laura Beth, and then I'll take over from there.
Okay, no worries. That's so just wanting to just to remind folks of a key principle in our work through the Accessibility Act, and I believe just in principle, the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism too, nothing about us without us, which is really important to keep in mind, that when we say that, what we mean, and it's very much connected to community engagement, is we don't want to be making decisions on behalf of a population or a group of people without their input, right? So when we think about that principle around including first voice representation and perspectives in discussions, decision making for plans, policies, programs, etc., that allows us to shape what we do for that community in a way that's going to be relevant and meaningful. So it's just food for thought to frame this community engagement section of the session today, because of course, including first voice into your engagement is going to be a really important consideration. So just wanting to start there and reminding folks of that key principle. Thanks, Maps.
Thank you. So I think we can generally agree that the importance of engagement cannot be overstated. I feel like everyone has seemed to mention that they're more concerned about over-engaging, but I'll just emphasize that engagement is important because no one knows our communities better than the people who are living and working in them. So from engagement, you'll get some valuable insights and perspectives that'll enrich and strengthen your actions. You'll be able to also foster a sense of ownership and accountability through which the community or communities will feel involved in the work. It'll also help you to ensure that the efforts are truly reflective of their needs, priorities, and their wishes. So as Laura Beth mentioned, that first voice piece will help you to do that. And engagement will help you to build that trust and that credibility, again, tying back to that sense of ownership, accountability, and involvement. Next slide, please. So there are various ways to engage. And in thinking about these ways, again, we're trying to also avoid the engagement fatigue, but also advance a very co-creative process. So think about some very creative ways that you can engage. Consider partnership with local education institutions and libraries. The mention of universities. Those are some folks in your backyard, so to speak, who have the capacity, have the energy, the ideas to be involved in this process and to help you get the work done. Student involvement is something to consider engaging students in the projects will help to encourage them to be a part of this work, and it has so many other benefits as well. But there's an untapped resources in your educational institutions and your libraries, even as a space to which you can draw people and a place to engage. You can also think about community events that are ongoing. I'm an advocate for piggybacking on events that are already happening. Try to find events that are relevant. Think of even fairs, markets, and festivals. Might not feel relevant, but it's a good way to get out there and have face-to-face connections, meet people, and build those relationships. It's a good way to also leverage the networks of the folks who are hosting or organizing these events. They may have a broader reach than you yourself have, but there are also existing community groups who you could leverage their knowledge and networks as well. You'd want to consider mobile engagements or pop-ups. This is a really useful way to catch people who are kind of on the go. In high traffic areas, you can set up in parks, shopping areas, community centers, hopefully not bothering people too much, but those who are interested tend to take the time to be involved. So this could take the form of information or feedback stations, or you could have individuals who are moving around, possibly with surveys or just information to guide people to access your website or a platform of some sort, or share information about upcoming meetings. Technology is a big one. I know post-COVID, we're well aware of the benefits of virtual meetings, but there can also be some barriers, so be mindful of those, that virtual meetings don't always translate natural from in-person meetings. So these can be, you can have virtual town halls. If you aren't already, you can dedicate some of your ongoing virtual spaces to work specific to equity, anti-racism, and accessibility. Think about online surveys and platforms that we've mentioned. Hopefully we can support you in making sure they are inclusive and accessible. You could engage with local leaders and influencers. So these are the community leaders who are already doing this work. It's a great way to acknowledge their agency, their activity, their resilience, and all of the brilliance that they've brought to fill the gaps where government has not quite been able to serve. Word of mouth campaigns are also very good. So leveraging the folks who are doing this work and heavily involved in community is a great way to get the word out. Some folks may prefer anonymous feedback opportunities as a way to participate. So you could think about doing that. You could set up in locations or maybe municipally owned facilities. Think about churches or community centers as well, and have feedback boxes. You could have take-home engagement packages as well. That's one way to get folks to take the work home, bring it back, and submit it in their own time. That's, of course, if you have the time and the capacity to do that. Focus group sessions are a great way to engage with specific underrepresented and underserved communities to understand unique challenges. It'll allow you also to develop some culturally sensitive approaches. That's something that we're always happy to have a conversation about: culturally sensitive engagement, accessible engagement, and meaningful engagement. And for those who have the resources, micro grants to local community groups to help them to organize engagement activities can help them also to support the work that they're already doing. And it's an acknowledgement again to their agency and the great work that they're doing. Next slide, please. So when we spoke to some folks in smaller rural municipalities, towns, and villages, we heard that they were struggling with some capacity issues. And these are just some ideas to consider about how to navigate those capacity issues, particularly when it comes to understanding who your underrepresented and underserved communities are, how to identify them, how to reach them, etc. So one way to do that is a community mapping and asset identification exercise. This way, you're looking at who and what your local resources are. You try to identify those and you mobilize them accordingly. So this will give you a good insight of who's working within community, who are the community-based organizations who are on the ground, who have a pulse of all of the issues within the community. And once you've identified those, you kind of have a go-to in terms of a resource list. You can think about engaging with local institutions such as healthcare providers. They tend to meet folks from all different walks of life. Think of your clinics, your hospitals, your health services. They're very well in tune with who's who in the community. It's a common point of convergence. Think of other areas, other such services where people are often accessing. Community listening sessions are another one. Taking the time just to listen in different parts of going to community, meeting people where they're at. Engaging local faith-based groups, cultural organizations. This is a great way to reach your newcomers, immigrants, refugees, various communities, quite frankly. faith-based groups, faith-based institutions are a great way to connect. And cultural organizations and clubs that represent various ethnic and cultural communities are a great way to bring people in with your more, I guess, informal types of engagement. You can really embed yourselves within community, get involved, be present, and really just get to meet people face to face. Social media is a great way, of course. Community champions, you can identify and recruit volunteers to lead the work. Peer-led engagement, so this is more champions who can conduct peer-to-peer outreach. So folks who know folks, you could hire them as volunteers to work on this and reach out to their networks. And that's a great way to get trusted voices in community who can tap on shoulders and get more people involved. Partnering with your regional nonprofits and academic institutions, as I mentioned, is a great way too. And generally sharing your information using local radio, newspapers, bulletin boards, and information to get to residents. Think of your most traditional engagement approaches or channels. That's really where people are going now. We're circling back. It's a full circle moment. We're using kind of take-home notices at schools. We are trying to use more mail outs and things like that, posters in public places. It's really a great way to reach folks in a passive way as well. Think of multilingual materials as well. If you're aware of the communities within your jurisdiction, there may be a need to have multiple languages for those folks to make sure it's accessible for them. Next slide, please. Luke, is this you?
Sure, it's me. So when the announcement went out about the regulations, we were happy to announce agreement with AMANS, who are going to support the development and implementation of both your equity, anti-racism, and accessibility plans over the next 4 years. So that means that Julie and Roxanne will be your steady supports during this time. And that's pretty much all to say about that specifically. And then we can move to this slide where Julie and Roxanne will talk about their supports.
Great. Thanks, Luke. Roxanne?
So we're going to be talking about the AMAN supports for plans. So government's oversight of the work and support through the Equity and Anti-Racism and Accessibility Steering Committee with the updated terms of references. We'll also have recruitment of new committee members to include the municipal CAOs and leads with the first voice experience. And that's really essential for having the committees. Resources, we also have a policy review of municipal policies to support equity and anti-racism and in the accessibility work in the municipality organizations and build a policy bank of resources. Municipal Ideas platform to be updated as a resource hub for municipal anti-racism and accessibility leads with public viewing availability. We'll also have question and answers will be developed from the leads group email exchange so that the information shared in available through topic searches. We'll have mapping widgets to be developed to highlight accessible assets and community events related to the work, for example, and available to be viewed also by the public. Next slide, please. We'll have additional resources, the development of First Voices list of consultants, expertise available for training, facilitation, knowledge, digital documentation, and asset reviewing engagement activities. These resources will be developed for the work to support both plans with the province and community partners. And this will be a great resource as well as support systems while creating these plans. We'll create and administer a municipal capacity development grant to support engagement projects, strategies for the dismantling racism and hate work, specific to the communities in municipalities and villages. AMANS will engage with leads on needs and priorities for the funding. As well as we have an AMANS website, we're going to redesign to update for the OEA as well as the Accessibility Director public-facing resources. So we'll have additional resources on the website. We currently have the Lunch and Learns community of practice and education and training events to be added to the online calendar event through Feed Loop. This will be launched in the summer 2024, so in a couple of weeks, we're hoping. In that, the resource documents and recordings will be available all in one piece. So if people are unable to attend a certain lunch and learn, they'll be able to go onto the website and watch it over there. Julie, do you just want me to keep going?
Oh, sure. If you like, or I can go.
Sure, I can.
You're doing a great job. Keep going.
We'll also be providing communication resources supports for municipalities to support recognition of culturally diversity, awareness and celebration through communication and events. If successful, a grant for equitable access to reading for Nova Scotia will be provide funding for each municipal to increase access to accessibility and anti-racism plans, official plans, emergency preparedness, housing, and recreational and support programming for information, and guiding documents through the creation of alternative format options, so 2 documents per municipal unit. We'll also be identifying and sharing funding opportunities for municipalities and villages to support their plans and implementations and strategies.
So in addition, in terms of capacity development, we will continue the individualized support for municipal leads for feedback and insights into community engagement activities, planning strategies and priorities, advisory committee development, and we are available virtually and or in person on site to come and meet with you. And as you know, a lot of you do email and phone regularly, and we are certainly happy to have those communications with you on a daily basis. So do continue to reach out and ask. We're here for you. So we're going to create a survey for municipalities on your current needs to support you under both ACT requirements to find out exactly what it is that you're looking for and how we can further support you, whether it's education, training, knowledge development. We want to hear from you exactly what it is that you need. So we're going to engage you on how we can help support you in this work. We also are going to provide facilitation support to assist leads undertaking the equity and anti-racism self-assessment tool within your organizations. The community of practice. So these sessions will continue to be scheduled and are going to include topics to support the objectives of both the Dismantling Racism and Hate and Accessibility Acts and explore the intersections of equity, anti-racism, and accessibility. Additionally, the Lunch and Learn topics on accessibility and equity will continue to be scheduled. These are going to move to Wednesdays as per many requests, and this will start in September. The support for the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism tools developed with facilitation and training and implementation strategies for municipalities. So we will we'll provide support for you with those tools as they are rolled out. The group email contact that we currently have will expand to include the municipal staff assigned to the work of the Dismantling Racism and Hate Act. The majority of folks on this group email contact right now are either designated accessibility leads. Some of you are equity, diversity, inclusion specialists. Some of you are CAOs, some of you are recreation specialists, and some of you may be taking this work on as part of what it is that you do, but there may be others in your organization who are now included in the portfolio. So please do get them in touch with us so we can expand that ever-growing list and be able to share that with our partners at the Accessibility Directorate and the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism as well. The group contact, if you're here in this room today for the first time and you're not on the group contact list, it's a really great way to share communications, to be able to inform one another, share your experiences, and ask questions of the group and seek advice within this expanding community of practice. The body of knowledge continues to grow, and it's really great to see the expertise that's developing from one end of the province to the other. So the additional capacity development when the Accessibility Directorate Built Environment tool rolls out. We will provide support for the implementation and training of the provincial Built Environment Standards tool when it becomes available. We will also be partnering with Sea Change CoLab on an accessibility confident employers regional full day training session, one which will be scheduled in November 2024, this fall, and then another one we're looking at for spring, probably May 2025. Additional capacity development includes providing support for AMAN's conference committees with input into program content and operations to support the Equity, Anti-Racism, Accessibility Program objectives with senior municipal leadership at these conferences. The training offerings, topics, and facilitators developed through community partnerships and in-house offerings will continue and develop as identified by your needs in response to our survey. There remain still 4 full-day sessions to be held in regions on accessible digital communications and plain language training. The first one we held in the South Shore, and I think there were 11 municipalities present at that. It was an amazing day. So there are 4 paid for full-day training sessions to be held in your regions. If you're interested in hosting one of these, please contact us and let us know, and we'll help get that set up. And that's with Erin Casey for plain language, kind of an intensive for municipalities, as well as Lisa Snyder doing the accessible digital communications piece. We will also continue to participate in committees with provincial scope to help build relationships, capacity, and partnerships through the work, such as the Access Awareness Week. And this last May had the most community and municipal response to Access Awareness Week ever in the history of the event. So congratulations to everybody. Tip to tip in the province for participating in Access Awareness Week and building your capacity within your communities to help raise awareness. So really amazing work. We will also continue to identify opportunities to support municipalities in developing your relationships with underrepresented populations for engagement within your regions, and also to help facilitate these conversations and make the connections. Some tools that currently exist are the AMAN's Municipal Accessibility Audit Tool for the built environment, and the update right now is happening to include parks and recreational facilities. We have also underway the AMAN's Municipal Accessible Signage and Wayfinding Visual Catalog, which is in progress, and that came out of the Lunch and Learn from the facilitators who presented on accessibility in wayfinding and signage. That team actually came back to us and offered, because there were so many questions from people about standards and signage and wayfinding, they offered to create a visual catalog to help you understand the requirements with this visual support. So that currently is underway and should be available by September. And we're also going to continue to work with our partners to fill gaps for tool development as identified by the needs of the municipalities and villages to support the equity, anti-racism, and accessibility objectives and to meet the requirements under each act. So whether the OEA or the AD is rolling out tools, we will definitely support your support in understanding how to use those tools and implement those tools. And we will also continue to look at opportunities develop in-house or with our partners as they are available to do so. And again, there is the monitoring, evaluation, and learning tool, which we know many of you had the chance to look over and learn from, and we will continue to support you on developing those pieces as well. So yeah, I guess we can open this up for questions, further questions, comments, discussion. Anything else anybody would like to add? If everyone feeling confident with the amount of information that you've just been given? So Barb says no questions, just huge thanks for getting us ready for this important work. 100%. Yes, thank you. Earl McKenzie says great info today. Roxy says lots to absorb. Question to follow.
Hi there.
As in,
Hi, sorry.
go ahead.
It's Jennifer Bickerton here. I'm with the town of Amherst. I just have a quick question regarding what was talked about earlier about possibly combining plans. I didn't know if there was going to be any information on that. I know we do have an accessibility plan, but we're closely connected with the county, as you probably know, Cumberland County. So I just wasn't sure if there was any information available on that.
Sorry, so Laura Beth, do you want to jump in first?
You go first and
Okay.
I can add.
So it's up to you to decide whether or not you proceed with a joint plan. So looking at the accessibility plans that are in place, I noticed there's a couple of villages and municipalities that have collaborated to date. So it might make good sense that you take the same approach, whether or not you do a combined equity, anti-racism, and accessibility plan or not, to do it with multiple municipalities or villages partners.
Okay, and do you know currently, or would it be available to us to know which municipalities have collaborated on those plans? Just perhaps we could be a resource, we could touch base with them to see kind of their approach and how they did it.
Sorry,
Yes.
you're asking about which municipalities
I mean,
have
if you have
joint,
that, yeah,
joint plans?
yes,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah, so there are a number. So Kings County is here today. Katie, if you're still on the call, Katie is overseeing a joint plan with villages. Do you have 8, I think, Katie? Are there 8 in your portfolio? 7 villages, Katie has 7 villages plus Kings County. Yeah, so that's 8. And there's also Ellen Johnson over in the Lunenburg district, and they have 5. Yeah, there's definitely a few. Now, were you asking about joint plans in terms of working with other municipalities, or were you talking about the joint plan of the Accessibility Act and the Dismantling Racism and Hate Act coming together into one plan, just so I'm clear?
With other municipalities, like particularly working with the county, like the Cumberland County, because they would have they would have to be doing the same work. So
I'd like to jump in if that's okay. Just for folks' information, all accessibility plans in the province are posted on our website. I'll put a link in the chat, but we do have the data, Julie, around how many joint plans there are in Nova Scotia. So we could send that along through Julie. But just to answer your question, I think this is the time to reflect on whether your organization wants to continue with an individual plan or develop a joint plan. And so most municipalities are in the same boat. Some have already begun their planning processes though. So I know Cumberland County has begun their process. Okay. So you may want to reach out. And I mean, Oxford would be another consideration.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there are several models. Shelburne County is another model of joint planning. There are lots of folks you could reach out to for advice, but I think I could help with that by sending Julie a list of what joint plans are out there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I just posted the link. All the accessibility plans, including the Government of Nova Scotia's, are also on the AMAN site. So I've posted that link also in the chat. So, and they are alphabetical, so you can scroll through those.
Thank you.
It's a big list. Anybody else have any questions or comments that they would like to ask? But I think that actually would be a really great session, and I know that it doesn't apply to everybody, but juggling the joint plans certainly has its own advantages as well as challenges. So, I'd be interested to know if for the community of practice, if people would be interested in hosting a session on joint plans, and those of you who are doing them can talk about them. And, again, sort of how you're overcoming some of those challenges and how you're sharing the communications and meeting the different priorities even of the different municipalities and villages involved. That can certainly be something that we can put forth. And also another thing to think about too is moving forward that is there an opportunity to also include or be included in other joint plans going forward? Because those are some of the conversations that some of the smaller municipalities have had just in terms of capacity. How do they become involved in a joint plan? And some of the, this all happened also before I got here, so I'm not exactly sure how joint plans were developed, but I'd love to hear that in terms of how those conversations actually occurred. I don't know, Laura Beth, if you have any insight on that? No. Danielle, maybe you could just speak quickly to that about how the joint plan developed with St. Peter's.
Again, yeah, so unfortunately, this was also prior to me arriving in my position. But from my understanding, so we have a village commission in the riding of Richmond County. So we have created one joint plan. However, there are two appendixes. So the village of St. Peter's has their own, I guess, appendix looking at accessibility within the area of the village, whereas the rest of the plan pertains to kind of Richmond County as a whole. And then the other appendix pertains to various pieces of just Richmond County as a whole. Now, when we did engagement, we also did engagement with the village, and members of the village commission also sit on our AAC, so our Accessibility Advisory Committee. And as we are now in the midst of the refresh process, I'm meeting every second week with the village commission to help begin planning stages and engagement opportunities with community members and the village. So we've fostered a really good relationship with the village commission, and are really trying to help kind of have one entity, I guess. I know that's not really comparative to 7 different plans or groups that you're working with, but that's kind of how we broke it open, was having one plan, one overarching plan, but with different appendices relating to the various areas. But yeah, if you have questions, feel free to reach out.
Great. Thanks, Danielle. So we are at time, and if there are no further comments or questions, I'd like to thank our guests today, our panelists, Luke, Maps, Sonia, and Laura Beth, who are always happy to have conversations and to engage with municipalities about these very important subjects, and to be available to help folks work through the challenges and ideas as we work forward for the next couple of years on the requirements under these acts. So thanks everybody for coming today, and I look forward to seeing you all next month. And yeah, take care, reach out, and thanks again.